This video will discuss the role of men and women in Macbeth, the problems that both genders face, the problems that they overcome, and ultimately the way in which Shakespeare reconciles the differences between the two genders. So let's first consider what are some of the issues surrounding gender in the play. Well, first of all, we have in the idea of Lady Macbeth this notion of the restrictive nature of idealized femininity, the way in which the expectations of gender, and particularly of women, can be so limiting. But on the flip side of that, we also have the demanding nature of idealized masculinity. And that idealized version of manhood can be just as problematic as the restrictions placed upon women. Following on from that, most importantly, we have the subversive quality of Lady Macbeth, a character who challenges the feminine expectation of subservience. Following that, we have the link between powerful and subversive females and the supernatural. Lady Macbeth is linked in so many ways to the witches in this play. And as a result of that, those powerful females are rendered androgynous without gender, and we will consider the reasons for that later in this presentation. Lady Macbeth's desire to be stripped of her femininity first becomes clear in Act 1, Scene 5, when she comes onto the stage, and we get two wonderful soliloquies from her in her first scene in the play. And she demands for the spirits who tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here. It's one of her most famous lines. If we're going to consider some method here, then the imperative verb unsex certainly reveals a confidence in her power to manipulate and dominate. There is a sense of certainty in it. Here, of course, highlights the immediacy and certainty of her ambition. We can link that to her line, I see the future in the instant. She is different from Macbeth in that sense, who is full of doubt before he commits the murder. He approaches the murder with a great sense of trepidation. Lady Macbeth is certain from the outset. And in that way, she subverts our expectation of the woman. And unsex, of course, emphasizes Lady Macbeth's desire to be stripped of her femininity. She doesn't want to be masculine here. She wants to be sexless. She wants to become something other. She recognizes that in the female form, she cannot exert the power that she needs to in order to promote Macbeth to the throne. So she has to get rid of those restrictions. Following on from that, we get these references here to Lady Macbeth's menstrual cycle, make thick my blood, and she wants to be rid of the compunctious visitings of nature. She wants to stop that cycle because she is trying to stop the natural processes and natural cycles of femininity, to be rid of them. Further than that, blood can perhaps be seen here as a symbol of love and compassion, stereotypically feminine traits, and Lady Macbeth wants to thicken and stop the flow of those emotions, because it is those emotions that will lead to guilt and remorse, and she knows that she cannot experience those emotions if she is going to commit the deeds and drive Macbeth to commit the deeds that need to be done. So Lady Macbeth is aiming here to disrupt not just the natural order of God by killing the king, but also the natural order, as laid out by God, of gender too. And in order to strip herself of femininity, she must become androgynous. She must become without gender. And in doing that, she very much aligns herself with the supernatural and the witches in the play. As Banquo recognises when he meets the witches in Act 1, Scene 3, that they look like women, yet their beards forbid him to interpret that they are so. They are neither man nor woman. They cannot be recognised as either. And so when Lady Macbeth calls on those spirits to unsex her, she aligns herself with that supernatural world. They cannot, of course, hold such power in feminine form in Shakespeare's and Macbeth's patriarchal society. They also need to become something other than male or female, because they are too subversive in lots of ways for a patriarchal society. They challenge the natural order too strongly to exist as women. So what Shakespeare does is to demonize these characters, to make them something supernatural, something witch-like. Because if they are demonized, then the audience can feel more comfortable. Particularly the men in the audience can start to feel more comfortable with their power. They're not powerful women, they're powerful beings in another world. So I suppose Shakespeare's message here is the woman can be powerful, but for his audience, she must become something other in order to hold such power. There's no question that the women are ultimately the most powerful characters in this play. The witches fuel Macbeth's ambition immediately. They give him the prophecies, and he says, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more." Macbeth recognizes that they are imperfect, but he wants to know more about the future. That is where his ambition begins. Because, as Banquo recognizes, the witches have the ability to look into the seeds of time. And Lady Macbeth intensifies and drives Macbeth's greed, evil, and ambition. She says that she will pour her spirits in his ear. She wants to put her evil intent into him. So how do women go about exploiting the men in this play and exerting their power? Neither of the women, either the witches or Lady Macbeth, actually have the ability to change the future. The witches can look into the seeds of time, but they cannot change fate. And Lady Macbeth, likewise, she can't force her husband to do anything in particular. But they both go about it in the same way. The witches, to a certain extent, and Lady Macbeth absolutely, exploits the pressure of the masculine ideal. Lady Macbeth realizes that Macbeth is under intense pressure to be a man. Macbeth says here, "I dare do all that may become a man, who dares more is none." Dares, and the repetition of dares here, reveals the idea that masculinity is synonymous with courage and bravery. And Macbeth clearly sees himself here, or he certainly wants to appear as the ideal version of a man. And Lady Macbeth recognises this, and she plays on it. And she therefore uses that expectation of masculinity to emasculate her husband, to challenge his masculinity and force him into action. She says, "When you durst do it, then you are a man." And then she says this interesting line, "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself this morning?" Lady Macbeth, her power comes in the recognition of the pressures that exist on men to be masculine. And her power comes in the recognition that masculinity is actually just a facade. And it links very nicely into lines such as, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." She knows that facades and appearances are important here. And she uses that expectation of Macbeth to challenge him and force him into action. That's where her power comes from. She knows the expectation of masculinity even better than the men do. And the witches, similarly, they can't control fate. Shakespeare makes that very, very clear. They don't put Macbeth under any sort of spell. All they do is predict the future for him. Macbeth's innate ambition and greed takes over from there. And what the witches cleverly exploit in Macbeth is that masculine need for legacy. Macbeth is obsessed with the idea of having a son to carry on his family line. One of the biggest points of contention and jealousy in this play, as far as Macbeth is concerned, is the prediction that Banquo will father kings. There is an indication that Macbeth's greatest desire is to create a legacy for himself, for a son to carry on his family line. And we see that most powerfully in Act 3, Scene 1, when Macbeth delivers his great soliloquy to be, "Thus is nothing but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep," he says. And the reason he fears Banquo is because of this idea of legacy. And he says, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my gripe." Well, both fruitless here and barren have associations with infertility. And Macbeth is insecure about his inability to father a son and create legacy. And the witches exploit that. So both Lady Macbeth and the witches exploit insecurities of men who are trying to live up to the masculine ideal. But at the end of the play, we get a return to gender expectation. In Act 5, Macbeth has gone full circle and he is once again the courageous warrior. Bear-like, I'll fight the course, and I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked. And Lady Macbeth likewise returns to the expectation of the woman. She comes onto the stage in Act 5, Scene 1, sleepwalking and rubbing her hands. "Out, damned spot, out, I say." Here, the spot of blood is a symbol of guilt, as it often is in this play. And Lady Macbeth is feeling the remorse that she'd got rid of in Act 1, Scene 5. She's full and overcome by guilt and remorse. And it's the way in which she wishes to be cleansed which is significant. "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." This mirrors Macbeth's line in Act 2, Scene 2, when he says, "Will all great Neptune's oceans wash this blood clean from my hands?" Very similar line, it almost mirrors that line. But notably, whereas Macbeth's line is a very masculine demand, he appeals to Neptune, the god of the sea, Lady Macbeth's is a very, very feminine demand. She is looking for the perfumes of Arabia to cleanse her of the guilt that she feels. So Lady Macbeth has been restored to the expectation of feminine compassion and hysteria. And perhaps Shakespeare is making the point here for his male audience, and particularly for his male king, James I, that women are unable to handle the power that Lady Macbeth acquires in this play. It's a way of soothing that male insecurity about being dominant in a patriarchal society. So why does Shakespeare return us to this expectation of gender at the end? Well, Lady Macduff is the perfect mother, the poor wren who will fight the owl. She dies. Macbeth retains the expectation of masculine courage and power. He dies too. Lady Macbeth reverts to the expectation of female compassion and hysteria. She dies at the end of this play. So if all these people who've reverted to type at the end, reverted to the expectation of their gender, die, then surely Shakespeare feels that these idealized versions of masculinity and femininity are unobtainable, or if you can obtain them, They are unsustainable, in fact, in a patriarchal society. What I'd like to do now is to bring some of these ideas together and just talk about how you might write about them and how you might construct your paragraphs in the exam. Hopefully in these 2 paragraphs which I'm about to show you, we cover each of the assessment objectives, AO1, which refers to ideas and references, analysis of methods, which is AO2, and context, which is AO3, where we're really going to talk about the expectations of a Jacobean society. I'll read the paragraph first and then talk about what my motivations were here. Lady Macbeth's thirst for power is immediately evident in Act 1, Scene 5, with her demand for the spirits who tend on mortal thoughts to unsex her. The imperative verb highlights her strength and the unquestionable confidence in her ability to dominate and manipulate. Furthermore, the desire to be unsexed surely exemplifies her wish to be freed from the restrictions of femininity in a patriarchal society. The subservient expectation of women in this society prevents her from exercising her power and realizing her aspiration for her husband to be crowned. For this reason, she renders herself genderless and aligns herself with the androgyny of the spirits or witches. So what I'm trying to do here is, the ideas are there, but it's the focus on method here. The quotations are spirits who tend on mortal thoughts and unsex me here. Focus on the methods that Shakespeare uses in order to create meaning. Here it is the imperative verb, the demanding nature of that verb, which reveals Lady Macbeth's confidence in her ability to dominate. And then I go back into the quotation and we're looking at the nature of the word unsex here, that revealing her desire to be freed from the restrictions of femininity. So what I wanted to show here is the need to spend time on your quotations, to get into your quotation and to pull the meaning out, looking at the methods that the writer has used. So AO1 is the ideas here at the start and end of this paragraph. AO2 is the middle part of this paragraph where we look at method and key words. And then AO3 is the discussion about the expectations of women in a patriarchal society. You can add further detail to your paragraphs by bringing in additional evidence. You can either delve deep into your quotation and pull out the meaning, but often you can add further detail by showing your knowledge of different quotations in the play that relate to the same idea. And that's what I'm trying to do in this paragraph here. Again, I'll read it and then I'll talk about what I've tried to achieve. Lady Macbeth's thirst for power is immediately evident in Act 1, Scene 5, with her demand for the spirits who tend on mortal thoughts to unsex her. The imperative verb highlights her strength and the unquestionable confidence in her ability to dominate and manipulate. Furthermore, the desire to be unsexed and freed from the restrictions of femininity in a patriarchal society is intensified through her wish to make thick her blood and be rid of the compunctious visitings of nature. Firstly, blood seems to be symbolic here of the stereotypical feminine traits of love and compassion, so it is unsurprising that Lady Macbeth wishes to thicken and stop the flow of such emotions. However, it is clear that this reference to blood and the visitings of nature is an additional desire to stop her menstrual cycle, presenting further evidence of her relentless drive towards disrupting not only the natural order of God, but the natural order of gender too. By becoming genderless, Lady Macbeth aligns herself with the androgyny of the witches, rids herself of the subservient expectation of the female, and frees herself to drive her husband towards the crown. Now you'll notice the beginning and end of this. The beginning of this paragraph is the same as the previous one, and the end is very, very similar in terms of the context I'm referring to. But I've added additional detail to my analysis here, and I'm scoring additional marks for AO1 in terms of references and therefore additional marks for AO2 in terms of analysis by adding additional examples from the play. And what that also helps to do is to showcase your knowledge of this play. So for each idea, it's helpful to have a number of quotations which relate to that idea, because that enables you to really develop your analysis and score big marks in AO1 and AO2, which make up 24 marks out of your 30 available in this particular question. I hope that presentation has been helpful in looking at the issues of gender in the play and the way in which Shakespeare deals with those particular issues, which in turn reveals perhaps what Shakespeare's views on gender were.